It really is an honor to be asked to speak. I'm also very happy to see a number of my Competition Commission colleagues here scattered through the audience. I won't ask them to identify themselves so that they can later deny knowing me, which I'm sure will make them very happy. I'm happy for Hong Kong to host this conference and to see our city play a part in furthering the global discussion of important issues about the future of competition enforcement in the always changing landscape of the digital economy. Your attendance here today demonstrates that some of these issues are among the hottest topics in competition law around the world right now, and they should be. Big tech, digital platforms, algorithmic pricing, and artificial intelligence, among other things, are transforming the global economy and thus modes of competition in dramatic ways. And the pace of that transformation seems to be ever increasing. Understandably, the pace of change has caused the competition community to question whether the existing tools of competition law are adequate to the challenges presented by these new forms of competition. I think that they are. The existing fundamental competition law principles have already navigated the competitive changes wrought by the transition from the horse and buggy age to the automobile age to the jetliner age to the space age, and also from the slide rule to the calculator to the supercomputer and to the smartphone. So they should be adaptable to the digital economy. Indeed, we've already seen enforcement agencies conduct successful investigations and take enforcement action in this sector using the available tools. That doesn't mean, however, that enforcers shouldn't be thinking about whether and how to adapt those tools to the new challenges presented by the digital economy. Our investigative approach may need to become more proactive and efficient in recognition of the pace of change in this sector. Otherwise, that pace of change may result in unchecked conduct leading to greater and perhaps irreparable harm to competition in a shorter period of time. Of course, great care must still be given to avoid hasty or ill-conceived enforcement action that may chill and stymie rather than facilitate new innovation and competition. This represents a key and perhaps unique enforcement challenge for enforcement agencies. For enforcers with merger powers, I'm not one of those enforcers, but for those that have them, adapting to the challenges of the digital economy may mean, for example, taking greater account of factors such as innovation and disruption potential than they would in the past in assessing acquisitions of even low turnover companies, or taking a different approach to designing remedies in connection with mergers of those types of companies. But these examples strike me as tweaks in approach rather than wholesale changes to our laws. This is not my main point, however. A challenge for a competition enforcer is that while it must anticipate and plan for where competition's going, it must also prioritize and take action based on where competition actually is and the current tests that it faces. Failing to do so may sidetrack or even delay competition and innovation from developing as we anticipate and want. The digital economy represents that sort of a challenge for the Hong Kong Competition Commission and perhaps for other enforcers as well. While the digital economy is undeniably reshaping much of the global competitive landscape, its impact on Hong Kong, at least in relation to online shopping, appears to have been less tectonic so far. For instance, the Hong Kong Consumer Council released a 2016 report on consumer attitudes and business practices related to online shopping. At a time when 81% of UK citizens, 78% of Americans, 69% of Japanese, and 67% of mainland Chinese were shopping online, only 23% of Hong Kongers indicated that they were. Admittedly, the statistics are now dated, and there are indications that the number of Hong Kongers shopping online is increasing. But subsequent studies have continued to conclude that Hong Kong is still lagging behind in its adoption of this aspect of the digital economy. A 2017 KPMG study comparing the shopping preferences of Hong Kong and mainland consumers concluded, quote, compared to their counterparts across the border to date, shoppers in Hong Kong have been less keen to go online to buy what they want, end quote. According to the survey, Hong Kongers were much more likely to do their shopping in physical stores rather than online, except in the case of travel and entertainment purchases. The lag in Hong Kong to dive deeply into the digital economy may, however, not be limited to online retail shopping. A 2017 report by the Hong Kong Financial Services Development Council highlighted changes sweeping through the financial services sector as a result of dramatic advances in financial technology. As with online retail shopping, the report indicated that other jurisdictions such as the mainland, UK, Singapore, Australia, and others are embracing this new way of doing business. By contrast, Hong Kong's presence in the fintech space has been much more modest. The report stated, quote, "From a long-term developmental standpoint, Hong Kong is very strong in fin, but not strong in tech. And there is competition as other centers move rapidly ahead with their own fintech initiatives." The same can be said about the insurance sector. An Alliance report found that Hong Kongers spend more on premiums per capita basis than anywhere else in the world, and that figure is continuing to rise. So it's perhaps not surprising that a study by Hayes recruiting experts found that, quote, "While other international insurance hubs such as London, Berlin, and New York have embraced the digitalization of the industry, for now, Hong Kong is lagging behind in terms of insurtech." Less direct, but nonetheless telling corroboration for some of these studies can be found in the consumer complaints and queries that the Commission receives. Suffice it to say, they have very much an old economy rather than a new economy flavor to them. In Hong Kong, it is the property management and building maintenance sector that receives far and away the most complaints. While information technology is the second largest category of complaints, those complaints relate more to hardware and software transactions than to any issues related to digital platforms. While I'm not suggesting that the Commission's approach to enforcement is merely reactive, I think it is indicative that the new economy concerns are not registering high on the list of concerns of Hong Kong's consumers. So, while the international competition community is asking and exploring good and important questions about the ways in which the digital economy is being dominated or could be abused, these questions are perhaps more appropriate for enforcers in jurisdictions where there has been greater integration, and particularly where they're looking to prioritize bringing enforcement proceedings in the digital economy. For a jurisdiction like Hong Kong, where several aspects of the digital economy have not yet fully taken root, our enforcement focus will inevitably be broader. However, the work of people like you thinking hard about these issues now and the experience of other parts of the world gives us much to think about in terms of potential competitive threats when they do take root here. In Hong Kong, there are some additional fundamental questions, such as why Hong Kong is behind some of its peers in adopting key aspects of the digital economy. One suggestion that I've heard on a number of occasions is that it's simply a consumer preference issue, which wouldn't necessarily raise competition concerns. Hong Kong is hot and humid, and its residents usually live in small quarters, which make the space and air conditioning of our local shopping palaces very attractive. I've heard this a number of times, and perhaps there's something to that. But I don't think that quite explains the lack of fintech or insurtech adoption in Hong Kong compared to other jurisdictions of comparable economic sophistication and development. No matter how roomy the waiting room or how cool the air conditioning, I've yet to meet anyone who enjoys going to the bank or to an insurance office. This may suggest impediments, whether regulatory or exclusionary, going more to the heart of our work and warning greater examination. I do not want to discourage those of us in Hong Kong thinking about the future challenges to competition that could be presented by the digital economy, but I also do not want us to ignore the more basic questions about why it is not arriving in Hong Kong at a similar pace as elsewhere. Competition concerns may lay in the answers to those questions. There are suggestions that, in at least some sectors, the regulatory environment is a significant contributing factor. Indeed, there are current examples to which I can point that demonstrate government regulation is certainly a contributing factor to the prevention of disruptive technology that could improve competition in the market. Look no further than the government's proposed franchise taxi scheme. That scheme proposes to address consumer dissatisfaction with taxi franchises that are insulated from competition by creating yet another franchise scheme that will do little to pressure traditional taxis competitively and will itself be insulated from true competition. As a result, the Commission recently issued a paper critiquing the government's proposed franchise taxi scheme and advocated for the legalization of ride-hailing services. This is just one example of the Commission's work to advise the government on ways that the digital economy can enhance innovation and competition if allowed to develop here. We must also be watchful for exclusionary conduct by dominant Hong Kong business interests, whose grip on Hong Kong consumers may be loosened by the introduction of new and non-localized forms of competition from the digital economy. While the digital economy may potentially expose Hong Kong to other exclusionary conduct by its giants, it will also provide Hong Kongers with more diversified choice and competition than currently exists in one of the most expensive cities in the world in which to live. That's not to say that the Commission is passively waiting for greater adoption of digital platforms before beginning to scrutinize them. It certainly is not. The Commission currently is looking at some platforms and market sectors where those platforms are already significant players for Hong Kong consumers. Nonetheless, the question remains, or the question of why these platforms seem to be more the exception than the rule in terms of their adoption in Hong Kong, remains a question worth asking. Finally, the Commission and other enforcers must be mindful of advances in pricing technology, such as algorithmic pricing, that raise new and challenging modes of potential anti-competitive conduct. While machine learning is certainly most often utilized in e-commerce platforms, it also has application and is capable of misuse even in traditional bricks and mortar businesses. But while the risk of algorithms learning to collude with each other rightfully has been much discussed as a competition concern, and competition enforcers may indeed need to contend with that issue in the future, we should not forget that the human factor still exists and may be determinative. One of the few prosecutions to date, indeed the only one of which I'm aware and most familiar, of a cartel that utilized pricing algorithms involved the online sale of wall art. While the pricing algorithms of two companies did in fact coordinate their pricing, they were specifically written by humans to do so, pursuant to a cartel agreement reached by the human executives of the companies. At its core, it was just an old-fashioned cartel with a new means of implementation. So as the competition world evolves, it also remains the same in many respects. The challenge for the competition community is to keep up with the evolution while also getting ahead of it, not also getting ahead of it in ways that may result in more immediate questions or old-fashioned challenges being left unaddressed. So thank you very much. Those are my comments today. And unfortunately, I have to go on to a competition commission meeting, which starts in about 10 minutes. But I will have to take a few minutes if anybody has a question or two.
The algorithmic pricing case you mentioned, art.com, I think it was called. But why do you think we haven't seen any other algorithmic cartels spring up like that? Any theories?
It would be hard for me to say that they haven't sprung up. It's really a matter of detecting them, would be my guess. Without, I can't say too much about the art.com case, although I oversaw that prosecution, other than, to really comment what's on the public record. And I've done about as much of that as I can here. But it really is the case that, from an enforcement standpoint, the digital economy, new forms of doing business are a challenge for all aspects of enforcement. On the cartel side, which is the world I've spent most of my career in, it's particularly difficult to think about how we can keep up with technology and the new ways that people can find to communicate with each other and to conspire with each other. And so, there could be other algorithmic pricing cartels out there. It's the detection that becomes difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brent.